Hey everybody, Ryan from AvidGadget here. Today I've got, finally, my video review of the K3 Note from Lenovo. I'm going to be going over a bunch of different stuff, and I've already got a full written review up at advogadget.com, but for those of you who haven't read that or would like my updated take on it a few weeks later, this will be the review for you. So, just a quick startup. This is a 5.5-inch 1080p phone with an octa-core MT6752 64-bit processor, 1.7 gigahertz, a Mali T760 GPU, 2 gigs of RAM, 16 gigs of ROM space, Bluetooth 4, dual microSIM slots, 13 megapixel rear camera, 5 megapixel front camera, 802.11 BGN Wi-Fi, 3000 milliamp hour battery, mega amp would be a bit insane, micro SD / TF card slot, super lightweight considering the battery life that you get out of it, and also very slim and very nice to hold in the hand. I have the white version. It also comes with a crazy bright yellow back if you're so inclined. It also comes with there's a version that comes with a crazy speaker on the back as well, though I haven't seen that for sale anywhere outside of China. So, strap in tight. The review's coming up. Alright, the quick pros and cons list. Great solid build quality on this phone. Feels pretty good in the hand, doesn't have a lot of flex considering it's a plastic back. The camera was actually surprisingly quite good on this phone. What else? It's pretty reasonable performance. It's not the fastest phone in the world. And with only 2 gigs of RAM, it does get a little bit bogged down. If you buy this from China, I would recommend installing the Indian ROW ROM, ROW, which is the stock ROM for the Indian market. It comes with Google Apps built in, which the Chinese one does not. The one that ships when you order it from China comes with Google Apps installed, but it's a really old version of Lenovo's custom UI, which is called Vibe UI. So I'd recommend definitely making yourself acquainted with that and purchasing and flashing that ROM directly, because then you don't have all the Chinese apps that you don't need, and you get all your Google apps, and you don't have to hack anything. And it supports over-the-air updates, which is a huge deal when you're dealing with a phone from Lenovo, because they actually have tons of support, and they are releasing updates fairly frequently. So, the screen on it is pretty beautiful. The viewing angles aren't the greatest. You can see here, I'm at about a 30-degree angle maybe, so there's flat, and you can't really see it at all. Even at, about a 25-30 degree angle, still not as bright and brilliant as when you're viewing it straight on. The screen itself is not Gorilla Glass. It scratches pretty easily, so I would recommend getting a screen protector, a tempered glass one, if you're going to get one of these. You can find them all over the net. Just Google for K3 Note tempered glass, and you will be sorted. There's a ton of theming functionality built in, and that's pretty nice. If you're actually a Chinese user, don't bother flashing the ROW ROM if you don't need Google Apps, because it's directed right at you. There's a ton of stuff on there. It's pretty pretty stock full of performance improvements or usability improvements for Chinese users. So, some of the cons: the stock Chinese ROM, if you update from the Lenovo VibeUI.com site, has a ton of bloatware. You know, you'll have pop-ups, you have all kinds of annoying functionality that nobody wants. So I definitely recommend getting rid of that. The 1080p screen that it has means that it does struggle a little bit performance-wise. The capacitive buttons down at the bottom here, don't know if you can really see them. Let's try and focus them. Boop. There they are. So menu, home, and back, and here you can see some of the scratches from being in my pocket. It's pretty heavily scratched up. Those buttons aren't backlit, and I also found the notification light is pretty dim, blinks very slowly, and in the stock Chinese ROM just does not work for anything other than, you know, some of the stock Chinese apps that are built into it. It doesn't work for Gmail, it doesn't work for a bunch of other stuff. Alright, so there's the quick pros and cons. I will come back in a minute with the build quality. Alright, build quality and hardware. This phone is fairly well built, feels pretty nice in the hand, doesn't have a ton of flex. My big quibble is the screen scratches super easily. That's really not that impressive. The back has the buttons built into it, so they're just cheap, sort of flimsy. Let's see if we can get some better exposure here. Whoop. There you can see, like, they're just cheap little plastic push buttons there. They do the job, but they do make it feel a little bit cheaper. And when you look at the actual back of the phone, you can see there's your power, volume down, volume up. One nice thing that someone pointed out to me the other day that I didn't even really think about too much is that, because I have big hands so it doesn't really matter to me, but they moved the power button below the volume buttons to make it more easily accessible. So if you've got small hands, because it is a 5.5 inch screen, it's fairly big, it's easier to reach. And the screen's pretty nice. It has a little bit of a yellowish tinge, which honestly I've never noticed at all. I only really noticed when comparing it up against the Emlaze M52, which has a bit of a bluish screen. So the little bit bluish versus a little bit yellowish, it really does show. But for normal everyday usage, you're not going to notice. One other thing I noticed, and I don't think I'll really be able to show it off in the video here, is there's a bit of a, well, you can sort of see it here, down at the bottom. There's a little bit of a LED bleed or something, like it's a little bit of a yellowish hue down at the bottom there, which showed up after a little bit of usage, and it kind of goes around the whole bottom and along the right side as well. Other than that, I turned off the auto brightness feature because I find it kind of annoying. Ah, stop it. Because it can sort of be a bit wonky. rest of the hardware, nothing to really complain about. The speaker's not super loud, but that's pretty much par for the course with these phones. The USB speaker attached headphone jack, they're both fine. Because the plastic case covers the whole back, what happens is you don't want to accidentally forget that you're plugged in and pull off the battery case, because it rips the micro USB out. But that aside, no, decent build quality. The only real quibble is the screen. Battery. The battery life on this phone is pretty impressive. It's a 3000 milliamp hour battery, which isn't gigantic. It's about average for these 5.5 inch 1080p 6752 phones. But I'm not a heavy user, and I easily get a full day with plenty left over at the end of the day. I did a YouTube battery test where basically I just throw it on Wi-Fi, medium screen brightness, and this is a super annoying feature. Yeah, put it on medium screen brightness, load up YouTube, have it stream over Wi-Fi until the battery completely dies. And I got 5.5 hours of streaming time, which is, in my opinion, pretty solid. And obviously no one's going to be doing that on a regular basis, but if you're watching movies or things like that, you're going to get a good bit of battery life out of it. The camera. Lenovo has a pretty awesome camera app, and it's pretty quick to focus. Does a good job in low light. It gets surprisingly good pictures. I was really surprised because the phone wasn't really advertised as having any particular camera sensor, so I was just expecting a cheap OmniVision sensor, and I don't know what's in here, but it's definitely captured much better pictures than a lot of the other Chinese phones I've had. And also there's a dual LED flash on the back here. I will turn on the flashlight. Stop it, stop it, stop it. Where is flashlight? Boop. It's not actually all that bright, considering it's a dual LED. I was expecting a lot brighter, but it's really not all that much brighter than a regular LED flash, if I'm being honest. But they call it a selling point. And yeah, I'm not going to say it compares to like an iPhone 6 or Galaxy S6, but for a $150 US phone, it's an incredibly good camera, and I really don't have any complaints. Network connectivity and calls and signals and audio quality in calls, no complaints at all, really. Talking outside in windy environments, it still sounds great. No, I don't have people complaining about not being able to hear me. I can hear callers just fine, volumes just fine. If you have a headset plugged in, the volume isn't as loud as it could be. That's only a really minor quibble. Speakerphone is kind of crap. I get strong LTE signal here in the west end of Toronto on 2600 megahertz. The occasional drop down to 3G, but 3G coverage is fantastic. It's got a full 850 and 1900 megahertz coverage here, which is for the big three Canadian networks. That's full coverage, and it works just fine. Honestly, no real complaints. The only thing that I would complain about, if I had to complain about something, is the fact that it doesn't support all of my local LTE frequencies, but you're not going to get that in a $150 phone from China. So when it comes down to it, that's about as good as it gets. Alright, now the big one, firmware. So obviously Lenovo is an absolutely gigantic manufacturer. They don't release too many phones outside of China, and this one is aimed primarily at the Chinese market and also at the Indian market. So while it's not aimed outside of those markets, within those markets they have tremendous software support. If you want to go onto the beta firmware side of things, over at vibeui.com, they have almost weekly releases of the firmware. Okay, loading. And now, granted, those are beta releases, but they're already up to Lollipop 5.1 Android, and it's pretty nice. You see some very good improvements from week to week if you want to get in on that. Personally, I tend to stay away from it. And yes, translate please. Boop, boop. Personally, I stuck with the Indian ROM that was just released a few weeks ago because it's just more stable, and with the it's got better multi-language support. It's got the Google Apps built in, so you don't have to try and hack that in, and it supports OTA updates with all that stuff. Whereas if you're using the Chinese ROM, you can still flash Google Apps and you can still get custom recoveries and you can still root it, but what happens is it breaks the over-the-air updates, and I haven't been able to get them working. So that can be a definite hindrance if you're not the type of person who knows how to back up all your app data and everything and restore it once you reflash the firmware. The firmware itself, it's very stable. Lenovo has a really nice custom version of Android with a ton of customizations. I'm not going to get into all of them, but you know, they've got in here. Boop. Let's look just at a quick few things. I also had a walkthrough of the firmware that came with it. But here you've got double press of any of the volume keys while the screen is off to snap a picture. If it's playing music, obviously they'll only be used for volume control. Double tap to wake the screen, which is pretty standard these days. So I turn that on and tap. Voila. A bunch of screen off gestures. You can slide the bottom of the screen to unlock when it's off, unlock the camera by drawing a V, unlock to Chrome by drawing an O. Smart Scene, which is basically a bunch of context-sensitive tasks. Either context can be time, when you bind to a specific wireless LAN, office settings, school settings, meeting settings, blah, blah, blah. It's got a, let's see if I can find it. I can't see it here. There is a night mode, which lets you take it a bit easier on your eyes. It's got fully customizable app notification management on an app-specific basis, which is very similar to the iPhone side of things, where you can choose how apps can display various notifications. You can set them as priority. What else? You can change your battery display to graphical or percentage. God, there's a million things. There's honestly so many things that it's hard to go through all of them at once. The security stuff is quite heavy duty. You can set secure zones. Personally, it's not something that I bother with. You can set up a guest user. You can set up other users, which is kind of nice, with their own space. They customize with their own apps and wallpapers. Yeah, so there really is a just absolutely brilliant amount of customizations here. One of the really nice ones, which I've found lacking in a lot of these Chinese phones, is the ability to set your volume on a context-specific basis. So you can separately set media, alarm, notifications, ringtone, and messages. Whereas a lot of these phones, if you go into the alarm app, you can set your alarm volume. If you're actually playing media, you can set your media volume. But actually trying to set the volumes separately for these things can be a huge pain in the butt. Other things, dial pad tones. It's got Dolby Atmos sound built in, which is a fancy little equalizer setup. Whoop. Looks nice. I'm not enough of an audiophile to actually really know what to do with that. That really annoying feature that I had there, I can't find it now, that prevented pocket dialing, seems to be pretty buggy. I would turn that off if I were you. That aside, yeah, the firmware on this has actually greatly improved, even from the time where I wrote my review on my site. The Chinese one suffers from a lot of bloatware, has a lot of extra stuff. Over-the-air updates don't work if you want Google Apps, all that stuff. But with the new Indian ROM, all that's gone, and that makes this even easier to recommend as a phone. So, overall performance, it's pretty snappy. No real complaints, honestly. I noticed in the old version of the app that it would be a bit laggy if you've not rebooted in a couple days, and that can be a bit annoying. But no, now it's a million times faster than it was on the Chinese ROM. Gaming performance, I think they've got some throttling in there for temperature issues. But a lot of these MT6752 phones have that same functionality, especially the 1080p ones. You can do some real customized tweaking if you want to kind of lower the resolution, turn off CPU throttling, things along those lines, but in all honesty, you don't really want to do that because over the long run, because it's going to lead to really reduced battery life, and just in general not be the best way to approach it. I'm just going to turn, oh, well, look at that. Managed to crash the app. because it was trying to connect to Google Play games, and I haven't been using this phone for a couple days, and I completely refreshed it to stock and forgot to go and update all of the existing apps, so that's why it crashed there, because it was trying to connect to Google Play games, and it's the old version of Google Play games that I've got installed here. So, and it also has to update Google Play services, which is why that failed. So suffice it to say, gaming performance is reasonable, but if you're playing for a half hour at a time, you're going to start to bog down. It's going to start to throttle the CPU because it does heat up a little bit. Other than that, looks great, performs great. Movies play just fine, no lag, no skipping. Yeah, that's about it. Can't really complain, especially for a $150 phone. And my final thoughts. My original final thoughts on this phone were a little bit different than they are now, because the original thoughts that I had were that this is a $150 phone that performs fantastic if you set it up for your non-techie relatives and don't let them ever try to update it. But with this new Indian ROM, I could actually even recommend, once you get that initial installation of the ROM on there, that this phone is perfectly usable for even non-techie folks. Updates work just fine. You're not going to root it for them, obviously, because they don't need it. But there's no bloatware really that needs to be removed. Okay, you've got share it and sync it, but those aren't really hugely intensive. Yeah, it just works. And frankly, when it comes to cheap phones from China, especially ones in this price range, $150, that is sort of unheard of. In all honesty, this is, in my opinion, the best value that can be had for a Chinese phone under $200 US. Hands down, no question, can't even come close to a competitor. So I don't know if I can give any stronger of a recommendation than that. Anyways, thanks for tuning in, thanks for sticking it out through the whole thing, and thanks for being patient, because it's been a while since my last review. I hope to be not taking quite so long till I get my next review up, so please subscribe. Please feel free to share, and if you're going to be buying these, please use my referral links, because that helps me fund getting more phones and doing more reviews. Alright, thanks everybody. Cheers.